on this computer. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to start the event. Welcome everyone, and a special welcome to our wonderful guest speakers who we are so grateful to have you on board and taking out some of your day to come chat with us about alternative protein. First of all, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country, which we will be expressing from all across Australia, as not everyone is currently located in Melbourne, Victoria today. As such, I like to show my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of elders past and present on which this meeting takes place on Zoom in Australia today at this time. So a little bit of an introduction for myself. My name is Marian Yukawa. I'm a Master of Biotech student at the University of Melbourne, and I will be emceeing today. I started this initiative alongside my friends Aravind and Anne because we wanted to start a community and generate excitement around alternative protein as a way to advance alternative protein research, innovation, and entrepreneurship at the University of Melbourne. We would like to welcome you. So today is the first event, the launch event of the Alternative Protein Initiative at the University of Melbourne. And we're an initiative supported by the Environment Department of UMSU, the University of Melbourne Student Union. And I think you'll have a better idea of what we do as this event progresses. This will be the first of many events brought to you by the initiative, with more educational events, in-person meetups, and socials planned for this upcoming semester. So make sure you like our new page to keep up to date with this and our upcoming events. And also, if you are interested in helping out because you're interested in it, definitely hit us up. We're more than happy to have your help. And also, we're running this in collaboration with the Biotechnology Club. So hello to the biotech students that have joined today. So we currently have a quick poll going, so it'll be wonderful if you can fill it out, as it gives us an idea of who is attending our events and how to best cater our events for everyone that is interested in alternative protein. So yeah, as Bianca mentioned, there's a polling section at the bottom, or if it has come up, yeah, it'll be great if you can fill it out. So I will close the poll just before I hand the mic to the speakers. Now, moving on to the gist of the event, we first have talks by Dean and Bianca for the first half of the event, and then we'll jump into the panel discussion and Q&A. We'll be collecting questions on Slido. Hopefully, we can still answer questions if we still have time before the end of the event at 4:30. It might go a little bit longer depending on questions and answers, the questions. But yeah, thank you all so much for people who have submitted their questions in already. I've actually made questions based on your questions for the panel discussion. So hopefully we can get a lot of them covered today. You can still submit your questions using Slido. The details for doing so will be posted on chat. Arvind, can you please do this? And also, if it's not posted, it's on the Facebook event description as well, or the discussion. So I'm going to ask for this presentation that you keep your microphones off during the presentation. This session is recorded, and the recording will be made available later on, and we'll post the details of this on the event page later. So keep an eye out for that if you wanted to revisit it once again. Okay, so with all that admin stuff out of the way, I love more than to just introduce our guest speakers. We have two guests tonight representing alternative protein. So I'd like to start with Dean. All right, so Dean, Dr. Powell Dean, he's a SciTech Specialist. He provides scientific and technical expertise for Good Food Institute, APAC, or Asia Pacific. He holds a PhD in molecular and cellular biology with a focus on poultry muscle development and a bachelor's in animal and veterinary bioscience, both from the University of Sydney. Dean has experience working for the Australian federal government, both as a scientific assessor for food safety regulations and as an international policy analyst focusing on the Asia Pacific region. So welcome, Dean. We're so excited to have you on board, and I'll hand the mic over to you.
Cool, thanks so much. And let me just share my screen. I think I might just need permission for that.
Oh,
grab
okay.
that.
And I've ended the poll as well. All right, so make a co-host. Yes.
Cool. And There we go, should have that now. So we've got my title here is Reimagining the Protein Supply to Feed 10 Billion, and that kind of really encapsulates the mission of GFI. And so thanks for that great introduction. I'm really excited to be here. Students are a big part of our focus. So I'm really glad to be able to talk to students, and especially in Australia, which is my home country, even though I do cover the whole Asia Pacific region for my job. And so first, just a little quick agenda. So first, we'll just talk about the case for rethinking meat and why we think alternative protein is really important. And then the Good Food Institute, who we are and what we do. I'll jump a little bit into alternative proteins to introduce how we classify them and how we see the technology evolving and where it's heading. And then finally, I'll just talk about the role that students are going to play in this ecosystem and how important we think they are. So to jump into it, industrial animal agriculture sits at the intersection of the most pressing issues we face today. First, we have global food insecurity. So we see there's tremendous inefficiency in the way we consume our resources on the earth, as well as the amount of resources that we need to make to sustain the human population that is rapidly growing. Then we add on to that the environmental impacts of growing this food. So industrial animal agriculture accounts for 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and that's about the same as the entire world transport sector. So all planes, cars, and other vehicles combined. And then you add to that the land use, water use, and nutrient runoff that occurs to create these animal food products. And the loss of biodiversity that results from this, there's a lot of environmental impacts that currently aren't really accounted for in the cost of these foods to the public. And then next, we have the potential for the next global pandemic. So 75% of emerging human pathogens are zoonotic in origin, or coming from animal species. And most of those that we observe come from industrial animal agriculture, where we have large volumes of animals in close proximity to people, which traditionally has not occurred at the scale that it does today. And on top of that, the UK government has predicted that by 2050, we'll have 10 million annual deaths from antimicrobial resistance globally. And the way this develops is that we're currently overusing antibiotics massively in our animal agriculture industry. So more antibiotics are used for animal agriculture than are used for the whole of human health globally. And that's only increasing. And then lastly, we have animal suffering. So 3 trillion animals a year are grown to feed the population. And this is massively increasing as populations in China, India, and other developing countries are eating more and more meat, as well as the traditional Western countries where we have very high meat consumption and much higher than it's ever been historically. And if we look at one of the bits I talked about there, which is land use, so just to break it down a bit to really show the scale of this, of the Earth's surface, 30% is land, and of this, 71% is habitable. And then if we dive into that, half of all habitable land on the Earth is used for agriculture, and within that, almost 80% is used for livestock production, with just the other 23% for crops. And then if you break that down into actual protein produced for human consumption, only 1/3 is provided by the meat and dairy industries, despite them contributing about 80% of agricultural land use. And so really, we have to think about why is this so inefficient? And the primary reason for this is the animals we use to get these proteins. So for example, the chicken here, my background's in chicken muscle biology, so it's an area I'm quite intimately related to. And so the chicken is one of the most optimized land animals ever. The meat that you create from chickens is more efficient than any other land animal that exists. But despite this, it still takes 9 calories of energy to create 1 calorie of food from a chicken. And that's just down to the basic laws of thermodynamics, where it gets to a point that an animal just can't be any more efficient than it is. And in addition to this, global meat demand is outpacing population growth, which is going to lead to the question of how will we feed 10 billion people by the year 2050, which is the expected global population. And so from this, we get to alternative proteins, which is the reason the Good Food Institute exists. So we've identified the 3 most promising categories of alternative proteins that we think are going to help solve this pending protein crisis. And so the first is plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, where it's quite simple. You replace animal protein products with alternatives directly produced from plants. And I'm sure everyone's at least tried one of these products, and they've been around for a long time, but we're currently experiencing what we call the plant-based 2.0 revolution, where companies and researchers are really trying to make these products exactly mimic their animal counterparts, whereas prior, they were just focused at the vegetarian and vegan markets, where exact mimicry really wasn't one of the target product characteristics. And then we look at cultivated meat, which is a really new and exciting area, which I'm sure Bianca will go into a lot more detail, where we use animal cell culture to produce cultivated or real meat grown outside of the animal. And this is just being commercialized for the very first time in December last year. So this is really an emerging market. It's a very exciting area to look at. And then last, we have the products and ingredients produced through fermentation, some of which are similar to the processes used to brew beer, for example. And so this is a new area that we recently added as a pillar of alternative proteins, just because we've seen the potential it has. And we break it down into 3 categories. So you have traditional fermentation. I mentioned beer, bread, kimchi. There's a number of products you'd be familiar with that are the process of fermentation, or product of fermentation, sorry. But then we also look at biomass fermentation as another category. And this is where the growing microbe itself is used as a hyper-efficient food source. And a great example of this is the fungal mycelium that's used in corn, which some of you may have tried. It's been around for decades, and corn was actually the only biomass fermentation product on the market for the last 40 odd years. But in the kind of recent 5 years, we've seen a lot more companies entering this space and really shaking it up with a lot of innovative products. And finally, we have precision fermentation. And this is where a microbe is modified through genetic or traditional breeding means to produce a functional ingredient that's typically sourced from animals such as milk proteins, which we can use to make dairy-free ice cream. And so then just to talk very quickly about the Good Food Institute itself, for those that aren't familiar with us. So we're a not-for-profit dedicated to accelerating the shift to sustainable, healthy, and just food system. And we're completely funded by philanthropy, so we're not funded by any industry players or companies themselves. And our organization employs over 100 staff around the globe. We have 6 affiliates. I'm in the Asia Pacific affiliate. We have a team spread across Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia. It's only 4 of us at the moment, but we are growing. And we have 5 other affiliates with most of our staff in the United States. And so I sit in the science and technology team, and we have a team of scientists, and our job is to work to advance and create open source information to help support the fundamental science of developing these fields. And then our corporate engagement team is building relationships with the world's largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them capitalize on these new opportunities in the alternative proteins market. And we also support entrepreneurs and startups as well as investors looking to get into this space. So if anyone has kind of an entrepreneurial mindset, we're definitely here to help you. And finally, our policy team advocates for fair regulation of plant-based and cultivated meat. And we also lobby governments to provide more investment dollars into sustainable protein research and development, which we're beginning to have some great successes internationally on that front. And really, one of our key pillars is that we share our knowledge freely, and we focus on what we term our research white spaces. And so this is the areas that really just aren't being addressed by current research efforts. And we're looking to push those now so that we can get alternative proteins sooner on everyone's plates. So jumping a little bit more into the plant-based side specifically. So we kind of have 3 key core research areas that we look at when we think about plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. And the first is crop development. So I'm sure you all know that soy is one of the biggest plant-based meat sources. But soy is an oil seed that's actually optimized for its oil production to make vegetable oil. So the protein used for plant-based meat is actually currently a byproduct. So one area we see is there's a real need to optimize crops for this plant protein so that it can become a major source of protein for human populations. And outside of that, we have hundreds of other plant species that aren't optimized for protein either, but some of them have really unique characteristics that suit them well to different plant-based meat uses. For example, mung beans are getting a lot of attention recently and is used in a number of high-profile products, and peas are another really up-and-coming protein source. So there's a lot of opportunities here for students that are looking into either traditional crop development or genetic modification or computational biology or computer science areas to get into this space. And then that flows over to ingredient optimization. So once we get a great protein content in a crop, we need to then get that protein out of the crop and have it in a great functional state to create the various products that we want. And so this is another area which is more on the engineering side of optimization. So we need to create new methodologies, new machinery to get these protein ingredients in a functional state that is, optimized. And then down the other end of the spectrum, we have the product formulation and manufacturing. And so what we're looking for here is there's a lot of opportunities for product development. And the fundamental challenge is that plant proteins natively have a globular form in kind of a circle, whereas animal protein have a fibrillar structure, which is the kind of fibers that you all know when you cut into or tear apart a piece of meat, it breaks into fibers. And so really the process of getting globular proteins into fiber is one of the key challenges that a lot of companies are facing and challenging in different ways. And this picture we have here, this is actually an announcement from 2 days ago. So this is from a Slovenian startup called Juicy Marbles. And this is a soy-based filet mignon where they've replicated intramuscular fat and meat-like fibers. So having these kind of whole meat ingredients with fat woven within them, this is still a really tough area for companies to get to. And this product, I think, retails for about $140 for a cut that should feed about 3 or 4 people. So there's still a lot of way to go in product development. If we look at cultivated meat, I'll just whip through these pretty quickly to not take up too much time. But from the very beginning, we need cell line development advances. So obviously, we need cells of different species to create different types of meat products. And within that, you need cell lines for meat, for fat, and for the intramuscular tissue that creates the final products. Secondly, you need media to grow these cells. And traditionally, this media has been optimized for biopharmaceutical or other research purposes, where having a high cost is tolerable. But when you're looking to make this a commercial good, where you need it to be a low price that consumers will buy, cost reductions in media is a crucial area that needs development. And so talking to some companies in this space, they've seen that they can reduce the cost of growth media for specific factors in growth media by up to 97% at their lab scale operation. And just as one example of this, FGF, it's a particular growth factor that's key for cell growth. You can buy that commercially for up to $1 million per gram. And that's okay for research because you only need a couple of micrograms. But if you're looking at this type of application, you need a lot of volume of it. But some companies have already looked at this process and they think they can get that cost down to a couple of dollars a gram, down from $1 million. So the optimization efforts are quite wild, and that's why costs are dropping a lot in the projections that these companies are making about their own products. And then if we look at scaffolds, that's another area where we need a lot of innovation. So scaffolds are what the cells grow and turn into muscle fibers on. They're the structure that binds them together, and it gives you that, again, that meaty, fibrous kind of structure that you need for these whole products. A mince is a lot simpler to make, but a steak is what people eventually need and will demand. And scaffolding is key here. And finally, bioprocess design. This is where we're taking a method that works well in the lab and turning it into an industrial process. So this is where we need, again, more engineering expertise, a lot of efficiency and scale-up expertise to turn what is a lab process into an industrial process in, a $400 million facility. And there's a lot of developments in this occurring now, but this is going to be work that goes on for decades. So students that are studying these types of things now, this is still going to need lots of development when you're a graduate in the field in 5 to 10 years' time. And just quickly, so we got some products here. So on the left, this is Aleph Farms cultivated 3D bioprinted ribeye steak. So they're an Israeli company, and they've just revealed this in December. So there's no products of this type on the market yet, but you can see they're starting to look like a real steak, and this has got kind of that fat woven into it. And this is made from cultivated fat and meat cells. And on the right, we have Eat Just chicken nuggets. And these are the first commercial products that just went on sale in Singapore in December. So from when this was kind of a thing of science fiction 10 years ago, we've already got a product on the market now. So things are developing quite rapidly. And finally, looking at fermentation. So the first is something that only applies to precision fermentation that I mentioned before, and this is target molecule development. So this can be a protein, a lipid, a flavor compound, a fragrance, or an enzyme. And so this is the specific product that you're looking to replace that traditionally comes from an animal. And so in the case of a protein target, say casein protein from milk, The instruction manual for synthesizing this is encoded in a host organism's DNA. So this is the fermenting microbe. And this can be naturally occurring if it's already a gene that the organism has, or it can be introduced through genetic engineering. And then the first widely commercialized food ingredient produced through this method was recombinant chymosin. So this is a coagulating enzyme used in cheese production. And chymosin was formerly extracted from calf stomachs in slaughterhouses. And this is how all cheese was made, as it's a key ingredient used in the production of cheese. However, now most modern cheese production already uses this product of precision fermentation. So this is a really validated industry. It's widely used. People already eat it every day. So the opportunities here are primed and ready to go. And then once you've got your target molecule, strain development is another really important area to look at. And so this accounts for a significant fraction of research in fermentation so far. And we've really barely scratched the surface in terms of different types of microbes that we can use, and the different types of products they can create. And so as we select for different host strains, we can start to get more nuanced in the terms of attributes we're looking for. So you can look for precise flavor enhancing metabolite profiles rather than simply microbes that have good growth traits or are good with a specific temperature range for growth. And so this work is likely to involve biotechnological tools such as gene editing, as well as simple breeding strategies powered by advanced genomic insights. And then just this picture we have here. So this is a heme compound produced by a company called Triton Algae Innovations. And so they found a microalgae that naturally produced heme and then used this advanced genomic technology to breed them naturally to create a lot of this heme. And heme is a key ingredient that has been identified in meat as providing the real meaty kind of iron type flavor. And so now they can produce this very efficiently in a plant-based source, and this will be able to be added to plant-based meats to really up their flavor profile and acceptability to consumers. And then this next example here, this is biomass fermentation. So on the left, this is a fungal mycelium biomass grown on a substrate. And then that can be cut up and processed and turned into the plant or fungal-based bacon you can see on the right. And this is another product that's being released this year by a company called Atlas Foods. So we're starting to see some like awesome products coming onto the market this year. So I think there's going to be a lot more attention in this space. And then if we jump to my next slide. So as a scientist, I love a good graph. So I had to put a couple in here. So this just shows some of the investment trends in alternative proteins. So this is data we've accumulated internally. And you can see in 2020, across the plant-based fermentation and cultivated markets, there's been a massive increase in funding. And that plant-based segment of the graph is actually for the US alone. So if we were looking globally, investment in plant-based meat is massive. And then not included on this graph, but of note is if we look at the Asia Pacific region specifically, more than 230 million was invested in alt protein startups in the last 12 months, the majority of which was plant-based. And this is more than 350% more investment than occurred in the previous 3 years combined. So this sector is just exploding locally. And there are a lot of companies locally in Australia and in the region taking advantage of this. And just to jump to a recent study that we did. So we actually released this 3 days ago. It's 2 studies. One's called a life cycle analysis, and the other is a techno-economic analysis of cultivated meat. And so what we did here was we talked to about 15 companies and research groups that are currently trying to bring cultivated meat to market. And we got them to confidentially share some of the data around their production costs and production inputs. And this type of study has never been done before for cultivated meat. So this is the most accurate estimation of what this industry will be like by 2030. And just a quote I took from the study here is cultivated meat can compete with some conventional meats on cost by 2030, with production costs in the study as low as $5.66 per kilo. And so that's in US dollars, so it's a bit more in Australian dollars, but that's still comparable to the cost we see for conventional meats in stores today. And going back to the environmental impacts, you can see here for cultivated chicken, there's a global warming, which is an aggregated statistic that you could look at in the study that has a number of factors going into it. There's a 17% reduction in global warming impact, 63% reduction in land use. And if you look at pork and beef, those reductions are massive. So from everything I've just said, you can see that we've made leaps and bounds in alternative proteins in recent years, but there's still ample white space remaining for those looking to get into the field. And that's where we get to universities and students like yourselves. So the first pillar that we see is education. Currently, there's not a lot of alternative protein classes and majors available to students to help train them into future scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs. But that's something we're helping to change. So in Israel, we've started a couple of courses in universities there that are running for their second time now. And students from those courses have either gone on to masters or PhDs, and some have immediately joined cultivated meat and other companies straight out of university. And I'm looking to start a course in Singapore this year. And we also are looking at Australia, and I know Bianca's looking at this as well, as potential opportunities for Australian universities to get involved. So this is something that students such as yourselves, if you think there's an opportunity in a course you're in, reach out to us, let us know, tell us who the professors are you think would be like to involved, and we'll reach out to them. Then we've also got research. So GFI funds research. We funded almost $4 million worth of alternative protein research over the last couple of years. And students are an integral part of that, whether they're applying themselves. I know some students have gotten their professors interested in alternative proteins, have shown them the opportunities. And if you can show them that there's research grant funding available and you'd be happy to do the work as an honors, master's, PhD student, you can have real impact very quickly by aligning your researchers' interests and funding opportunities. And that's a great way to build your own skill sets as well. And then that jumps into innovation. So students are a great source of innovation. Universities can help you in terms of if you do research that comes to a commercial solution, they can help you spin it out into a startup. And then on the community side, you need different skill sets to come together. So if you're a researcher or a research student that's come up with a brilliant idea, then you need to link up with someone from a business school, perhaps, who can help you look on the marketing side or targeting your particular market segment. So we really need this to be an interdisciplinary approach where that kind of multiplies the impact that we'll all have on the field. And so we currently have 10 groups active around the world. Hopefully we'll see some in Australia very soon. But some of them in the US particularly are having great impacts where they've encouraged some professors to include alternative proteins in their courses, or even helping to set up particular subjects within majors as well. So students are having real impacts around the world, and I think the opportunities are just growing for this. And finally, we have a lot of resources for any students that have been inspired or interested to learn more and get involved in this space. So you can head to our website, gfi.org/student guide for a particular guide targeted at students. And if you have a look around, we have dozens of resources you could look at for particular areas. And feel free to reach out to me directly at the email on the screen. I'll leave it there and say thank you.
Thank you, Dean. That was amazing. I think I'm more inspired to get into the field. And yeah, I was just astonished when, I heard that it's, conventional, cultured meat will be price competitive, reach price parity with conventional meat. So that's really exciting. That's such a big advancement in the field. And yeah, that's incredible. So thank you, Dean. All right, so moving on, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bianca Lê. She's the director of Cellular Agriculture Australia, a nonprofit organization with the mission to accelerate research, collaboration, and innovation across Australia's cellular agriculture sector. She's a cell biologist, having completed her PhD in anatomy and developmental biology at the Biomedicine Discovery Institute at Monash University. She has experience in STEM policy from the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, where she contributed to national policy projects spanning women in STEM, waste management, and science diplomacy. Bianca is also a science communicator and has previously given public talks, spoken on radio, and published articles on various topics, including science policy, diversity in STEM, and ecology, biomedicine, and cellular agriculture. She's also a bit of a superstar, and she has been recently selected as the superstar of STEM. So welcome, Bianca.
Thank you so much for that brilliant introduction. And thanks, Dean, for that great talk. Hi, everyone. Today I'll be reinforcing some of the important concepts that Dean has explained really well already, which actually makes my job a lot easier. I'll be giving you all a deep dive on the science behind cellular agriculture, some of the current research challenges in the space, as well as how you can get involved in the field. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to start my presentation with a bit of a depressing slide. The world is going through a bit of a rough patch that has been about 200 years in the making. And these four major challenges that humanity is currently facing isn't surprising news to any of you here today. Firstly, climate change and this mass destruction to our ecosystems and biodiversity. This widespread reduction in our natural resources has led to an increase in food insecurity around the world, particularly in regions where communities are reliant on local family farming. Thirdly, the overuse of antibiotics has led to a rise in antimicrobial resistance, which, according to the World Health Organization, is actually one of the biggest contributors of declining public health across all countries and all ages. This last one needs no explanation. It is why I'm speaking to you all via video call in my apartment rather than in person on campus. Zoonotic diseases are becoming. On top of all that, the United Nations have reported that our global population will reach 9.7 billion people by 2050, so in 30 years' time, which is pretty scary. That's many more mouths to feed and more bodies to shelter, and that will, of course, only exacerbate those four major challenges even further. So how can we as individuals effectively use our limited resources like our time, our money when we're donating, and our career capital in order to address these four major problems? Well, as you all know by now, these four problems have one common denominator, and that is industrialized animal agriculture. So animal agriculture as it currently stands affects so many facets of our modern society, unlike ever before. We've developed, as you can see here, really efficient ways of producing as much meat and as much milk and dairy as possible, using the limited land and all the antibiotics available to us. And because of that, we now have cheaper and higher quality proteins more widely available to an increasing percentage of our population, which of course is a great thing, but that comes at a price which we are now paying. And I know I said we've become really efficient at producing meat, but animal agriculture isn't efficient enough. And Dean already mentioned that chickens are one of the more efficient animals in terms of their calorie conversion rate, which is pretty sad considering the conversion rate is a measly 13%. When you look at cows, it's even worse. It takes 33 calories of feed to produce a single food calorie for humans. And that's because cows and chickens aren't engineered machines that we've developed to produce muscle mass for human consumption. They're animals that require calories themselves just to breathe and think, stay alive, pump blood around their body. And that's where those remaining 32 calories are going. So that 3% conversion rate is an economist's nightmare. It's a really, really inefficient system. So if our global population is expected to grow by about 2 billion people in the next 30 years, how are we expected to feed everyone without sacrificing our planet? We all know the answer to this. Switch to a vegan or a vegetarian diet. So for the past 50 years or so, there's been a lot of evidence from scientists, environmentalists, and we've had a lot of animal rights advocates who've been begging everyone to stop eating meat. And you know, how effective has that been? It's not been the most effective way to make change. And that's because behavior change is really hard for humans, despite the fact that we see all the statistics, we see all the scary media headlines linking animal agriculture to climate change, to antimicrobial resistance, and all those other horrible problems I mentioned before. the data is showing that people are eating even more meat now than ever, particularly in countries where their economy is growing. So human beings want to eat tasty food, but no one wants to feel bad doing it. So of course, we can continue to encourage people to eat fewer animal products, but we have to be honest with ourselves. If we want the majority of the global population to come together and help save the planet, we have to look at how we can rethink the supply chain rather than forcing everyone to reduce the demand. Okay, so we need to turn our attention to less damaging food production methods. Fortunately, the agriculture industry is really good at innovation. Farmers are constantly adapting to our changing world to ensure that more people are getting healthier food for cheaper. We've gone from horse-drawn plows to tractors, from physically mapping out and assessing crops to using drones and cool automated software to manage these really large areas of land, and from manually checking and diagnosing pests to using our phones and apps for disease control. So the good news is agriculture technology and food science will continue to innovate to help solve some of our most pressing challenges that our generation is currently facing. So let's talk about one of those examples of innovation. Food scientists are currently developing a sustainable, ethical, and safe way to produce meat. And so instead of raising, let's say, an entire chicken in order to just eat the breast or the thigh, we can grow those parts directly from the animal cells. And that's what cellular agriculture is. So it's predicted to use less land, water, and energy resources compared to conventional animal agriculture. And another bonus is that no animals die in this process. So before I get into that deep dive of how this science works, I'll explain what cell ag isn't. It is not plant-based meat or mock meat. Is of made soy or peas. It is real meat made from all the same chemicals and molecules you'd expect to find in the meat we eat today. I often get a lot of people saying, oh yeah, lab-grown meat, I've had that before when I was somewhere in the world. And unless you actually work in one of these companies or you've recently been to Singapore, you probably haven't. Okay, so the research field of cell ag is generally split into two production methods. The first being the development of tissues made from cells. So that includes producing meat for human consumption or even pet food. We can produce organs like liver for foie gras, or even skin tissue to produce leather. The second production method is precision fermentation. Now, this involves the use of fungi, bacteria, microalgae, and other microbes like yeast to develop a lot of the macronutrients we find in our food, like the proteins and fats. So this is also known as acellular agriculture, because while we're still using cells, we're producing the proteins and the lipids, which are the non-cellular components of these foods. So when it comes to producing milk, we're producing whey and casein. We can even develop patient-matched human breast milk for babies whose mothers can't breastfeed, albumin for chicken-free egg, collagen for supplements, or even skincare products. So it actually extends beyond food. So how does this work exactly? I'll start with the cultivated meat. So what does meat look like at a cellular level? I'll use beefsteak as an example here, but this applies to pigs, chicken, fish, shrimp, literally any animal you can think of. So regardless what species or cut of meat we're dealing with, meat is made up of millions of cells. The three predominant cell types are, skeletal muscle tissue, which contains these contractile proteins such as actin and myosin, which are these stripy proteins here, as well as myoglobin, which gives meat the red color. We've got fibroblasts, which produce all these extracellular proteins like collagen and elastin, which provide a lot of structure to our cells, to our tissue, as well as adipose tissue or adipocytes. And these cells produce all those unsaturated and saturated fats. So from a food perspective, the composition of these cells determine the nutritional profile of our food, the flavors, the textures, and even the color of meat. So how do we normally grow these cells for food? Well, currently we grow them inside an animal's body. All cells start off as stem cells. And there are many different types, but essentially they're just blank cells that can turn into any fully functioning mature cell type that we find in our bodies. They first have to proliferate or multiply or increase in number, and that's controlled by specific proliferative growth factors or molecules which circulate the body. Once those cells reach a certain cell density, they hypertrophy or get bigger in size, which again is controlled by hypertrophy-inducing growth factors. So throughout the cell's life, it's feeding on all these proteins or amino acids, carbohydrates, electrolytes that circulate the body via our blood. This whole process has been really well studied. You probably know it very well considering you're all biology students. And that's because it's heavily funded in our medical research industry to produce organs for regenerative medicine, okay? But what's actually stopping us from doing the exact same process but for food? Nothing. We can take a painless biopsy, so it's generally the size of an almond, and that biopsy from the animal will contain those myocytes, those fibroblasts, adipocytes, and we can feed those cells the exact same type of growth factors in a liquid solution called growth media. So I like to think of it like a Gatorade full of nutrients for the cells. We then isolate the stem cells of our choice and then grow these stem cells in large bioreactors. So as Dean mentioned, think of it like a brewery where we have these large tanks to produce meat. We can then harvest the meat and the muscle and fat cells and then perfuse them into an edible scaffold, which is made up of that collagen and elastin matrix to create lots of different types of meat cuts, like a ribeye versus a sirloin. And because we have complete control over this process, we can make meat healthier, for example, by changing the ratio of saturated to unsaturated fats. Or we can make meat even tastier than the meat we eat today by changing the amount or type of extracellular proteins that make up that scaffold, and therefore changing the texture and mouthfeel of meat. So what does this final product look like? We're no longer at the stage where companies are showing meat in a Petri dish, which is just not appealing for anyone. We're talking sashimi grade salmon, chicken breast that has that beautiful texture and grain from the animal muscle fibers that you just can't get with plant-based meats. We've even got a startup here up in Sydney called Vow. They're working with one of Australia's best chefs, Neil Perry, to create fine dining experiences with cultivated meat. And here's a photo of one of their goat sliders, which looks pretty delicious. So I've explained how cultivated meat is made, but how does acellular agriculture work? So acellular agriculture actually has been around for decades in the pharmaceutical industry. Take insulin production to treat diabetic patients, for example. Medical grade insulin used to be produced by harvesting thousands of pancreases from cows and pigs, then grinding them up and extracting the insulin from them, which doesn't sound really great. So not only was this a really inefficient process, animal insulin just isn't as biocompatible for humans as human insulin is. So now human insulin is produced by using recombinant gene technology, where we can insert human DNA into a yeast or bacterial cell and essentially convert that cell into a really efficient microfactory for human insulin production. And we can use that exact same process to produce all those proteins I mentioned before and the lipids for milk, eggs, supplements, and even skincare. So this is a diagram from the Good Food Institute. I highly recommend you going on their website for all their resources. They are the best. There's currently a lot of investment and growth in the industry. And while the field is accelerating at this mind-boggling rate, there are still 5 major challenges that need to be solved. And that's where you all come in. So whether you're thinking of doing a research project for your master's, or if you're looking for a job once you graduate, these are the research gaps that need to be filled over the next 5 or 10 years. So firstly, we need to optimize immortalized cell lines for different animal species. So creating cells that don't stop dividing, so we don't need to keep taking biopsies from animals. Secondly, growth media or cell culture media, that right now is the main cost driver at the moment. So we still need to develop effective, cost-effective media that doesn't contain any animal serum. And animal serum is normally taken from cow fetuses, so completely defeats the purpose of developing cultivated meat. Thirdly, we need to develop those 3D scaffolds that I mentioned, or even developing 3D printing techniques that can recreate that texture of those high-end complex cuts of meat like Wagyu or Kobe steaks, which have those beautiful marbling throughout the tissue. And fourthly, we need to develop automated bioreactors so that we can scale the production of cultivated meat and other cell ag products. And finally, we need to develop the pipelines into the food supply chain and distribution centres here in Australia and globally to ensure that cultivated meat and all the other products are on the same playing field as animal-based meats, eggs, and dairy. So why now and why Australia? Well, cellular agriculture conveniently lies in this intersection between stem cell research and animal agriculture. Australia just happens to be the world leaders in these 2 different sectors. So we've got some of the best infrastructure and expertise in regenerative medicine. Up at Monash, we have the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute, but we're also global leaders in animal agriculture. So we've got this brilliant reputation that's widely known for developing high quality, clean, safe meats that we export to a lot of our neighboring countries, particularly in Asia. So you're all set in a really great country to work in this field. So what's actually happening in the industry right now? Well, there are currently 6 startups in the space. I'll go through them quickly. Heros, they're up in Brisbane. They're developing that serum-free media. Val, I showed you some images of them before. They're developing cultivated meat from lots of different animal species. Cass Materials, they're based in Perth. They're developing plant-based scaffolds for cultivated meat production. Magic Valley, they're based in Gold Coast / Melbourne, developing meat. Change Foods, they're based in Melbourne / California. They're developing animal-free dairy. And Nourish Ingredients, they're based in Canberra, I believe, and they're developing animal-free fats. How about the academic space? Unfortunately, there's not that much happening, so there's definitely a lot more potential and scope for all of you to get involved in the field. So at the University of Melbourne, we've got Professor Robin Warner. She currently has 2 students, a PhD student and an honours student, both of which are actually volunteers for Cell Ag Australia. At University of New South Wales, we have Professor Johannes Lecout. And up at the University of the Sunshine Coast, we have Dr. Toma Ventura. And one of his students is also one of our volunteers, and her name's Lisa. She's developing cell-based crayfish meat, which I think is pretty cool. So that's where we come in. We are a non-for-profit, we're an official Australian charity that's dedicated to accelerating and promoting the field of cellular agriculture here in Australia. We have 3 major goals. Firstly, we want to develop a talent pipeline so students like you can easily get into either industry or academia in cell ag. We're also wanting to develop this connected and collaborative community full of academics who are talking to industry people, who are talking to interested students, who are talking to policymakers and government leaders. We want to make sure that everyone is working together to make sure that Australia is one of the best countries in the world to work in cell ag. And finally, we want to promote positive public awareness of cellular agriculture in order to develop the future consumers of these products. So maybe in about 1 year's time, I don't want to see any more media headlines calling it lab-grown meat. I don't want to see any images of minced meat in a petri dish. I just want to see the products as they are once they're ready for consumers, in situ on beautiful fine dining plates, ready for us to eat. So this audience is the first external, you're the first external people to see this new project that we'll be launching next week, which is really exciting. We've been working on this for about so many months now, but I'm really excited because it's called Pathways into Cellular Agriculture. So it's directed at people exactly like you who are interested in getting involved in this field. So basically, we've listed all of the research problems to solve in the field, and we've linked them to all the relevant majors or areas of expertise that will help you get a job or help you research that area. So we listed those majors. Say if you're majoring in environmental studies, you can find your major, and then that will be linked to the relevant research problems. And if you haven't decided on your major yet, or you're still figuring that out, you can look at all these research problems and say, oh, I'm really interested in food safety. What do I have to study, or what kind of experience do I need in order to get into that field? And then it will link you to the relevant majors. So that'll be launched next week. If you sign up to our newsletter, you'll get the link straight away in your inbox. So as I mentioned, 3 ways to stay up to date: sign up to our newsletter. You can follow all of our social media channels. It's the same handle. We've got a brilliant team of social media experts working to communicate this complex science in a more digestible way. And Marion is one of those experts who's dedicated a lot of her time in helping us with that. And finally, you can join our public Slack channel. So there's a few topics that we can discuss. You'll stay up to date with all the news. If you want to reach out to a scientist in the field, you can just send them a DM. It's a great community. I highly recommend you all get involved there. And that's everything. Thanks, everyone.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bianca. I think, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people here that looks, I'm just checking the participant list, and there's a lot of us from science, courses and pursuing a research area. So yeah, this has been really enlightening and really useful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just open up to the panel and discussion now. So I'm going to go straight in. This is for both of you. How are you thinking of reaching consumers that think this food, so plant-based meat or cell-based meat, if they think it's artificial or not natural? How might you reach them?
I guess I can jump in first on that. Well, I guess that's goes to the point of major areas of innovation. So in the plant-based meat space, there's a really traditional view of vegetarian or vegan burgers and other products. Yuck, those look weird, they taste weird. But really the way GFI views it, and a lot of these companies now are viewing it, is if you can match the price, if you can match the taste, and if you can match the appearance, a majority of consumers will accept that. Even if they may on the surface think, oh, that's not real meat. If you can meet those criteria, enough people will come across. And another element of that is putting these products in amongst other traditional meat products. So now in Coles or Woolies, you can go in and you can see plant-based meat is in the meat aisle. And the data has shown that sales of those products have skyrocketed once they're placed with other meat products. So I think there's a lot of kind of consumer perception like data that's coming out, and it's showing that even if people might say that they're not interested, if you market it correctly and get it at the right price, the data is showing that people will be interested. And I think especially with younger audience as well, people here, I'm 100% sure that more people here would be willing to give it a go than their parents would be, for example. So it's also a generational thing. But all of the data and factors are kind of showing that it's going in the right direction. and there's a lot of progress being made.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with what Dean has said. I would love the day where we stop calling it cultivated or clean or cell-based meat. The day we call it meat, because that's what it is biochemically, it's the exact same product, that's when consumers will realize that all we're changing is the way we're producing it, not the actual product itself. Having said that, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done to actually understand the market here in Australia. So there's been research in the US and a lot in China actually, that has shown that those two markets are completely different in how we should educate consumers about this product. So in the US, there are a lot of people who are more willing to try this product if they hear about the health benefits and the environmental benefits. In China, however, it's all about the food safety. Once they realize that it's been properly regulated, it's gone through the same food safety checks, that's what they're concerned about. So definitely more scope for research with the Australian market.
Brilliant answers, everyone. All right, so that moves in quite smoothly to the next point about nutrition and human health. So there's been a growing scientific body that mentions long-term health risks in eating too much meat and animal products. So how does the nutritional profile compare to, conventional animal-based products, and how do we improve their nutritional profiles?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this product is virtually identical to the meat that we eat today. So there is a chance that it will have the exact same nutritional profile as what we're eating. Having said that, we have complete control over the process. So we can control how much fats and the type of fats that we've got in this product. We can increase the unsaturated fats, decrease the saturated. We can even control what kind of scaffolding we use. So Cass Materials in Perth, they're developing that plant-based scaffold so that you can actually incorporate dietary fiber in meat, which you'd normally only get in vegetables. So there's just so much possibility with this technology.
Yeah, and I guess I'll stick more to the plant-based side so that we're not repeating each other. But I guess there was a bit of a stigma around plant-based products that they weren't as healthy as the real deal. So, some products had more salt or more fat to kind of make up the flavor profile. But if you look at, Impossible and Beyond, obviously kind of the global examples of what plant-based meat can be. And as they've scaled up, that's actually allowed them to begin to change both the cost. Beyond and Impossible announced 20% reductions in price. Additionally, they've had kind of 2.0 versions of their burgers where they've decreased saturated fat, decreased salt levels. And that's because they now have larger research staffs and larger budgets to really optimize their product formulation. So when you look at plant-based as a market, it's still a tiny, tiny proportion. I think the meat industry is in the trillions of dollars. So once we get larger, which it is, these budgets are going to increase for research. The health of these products is going to be optimized. And there was actually a study by Food Frontier. So they're another group very similar to GFI, but Australia focused. And they compared all of the plant-based products on the market with a cross-section of traditional meat products. And they found that nutritionally that it's already equivalent, or plant-based alternatives are healthier. So really, I think that comes down more to consumer perception again, because the products are already showing that they are healthier, if the same or healthier already.
Wonderful. So I think Bianca touched on this earlier, but I would like to hear more from Dean as well. So can Australia be a major part in alternative protein? And do we have more advantages compared to other countries?
Yeah, so definitely what Bianca was already saying, but I guess I've had a bit of experience from talking to some of these industry groups where they have seen the potential opportunities, again, going to the plant-based sector, that we're one of the world's largest crop producers. And in a region like Asia, where there's a number of countries that don't have a lot of cropland, or they don't have the highly advanced industrialized automated systems we do, where we can produce these crops at lower prices with higher quality controls. And now we're looking at export opportunities for this. So one of the issues at the moment is that although there's a lot of crops out there, they might not be optimized for protein. that's one issue in of itself. The next issue is then processing. And I mentioned about, you have to get the protein out of the plant. And the kind of crazy situation is that Australia is a massive producer of a lot of these crops that are used in plant-based protein, but we don't have the capacity to process them and then turn them into plant-based products. So we're still importing products from the US and Europe, even though we're exporting the base crops. So there's investment being made in this space and the capacity is growing. And industries have recognized that Australia has a massive export opportunity for this because of all the advantages that Bianca mentioned, in that our industry is extremely highly regarded and already very efficient. So yeah, we're a natural powerhouse in addition to all the scientific expertise that Bianca mentioned as well.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to move on to the Slido questions. I'm going to swap between the Slido questions as they come in and also the panel discussion questions that we've had. So this one looks like it's more towards Bianca, but I think it can be both. Is there any plans to involve the local farmers that may worry that cultured meat industry or like plant-based meat industry will diminish their traditional farming business?
Yeah, so currently we're not, that's not in our jurisdiction. Food Frontier, as Dean mentioned, is the other nonprofit in the space. They are working closely with government and the National Farmers Federation and policymakers to ensure that they're included in the discussion as well. We still need farmers. We need to develop crops to produce all the serum-free media. They're definitely an important component of the cell ag industry. And I'm sure Dean can talk about the plant-based industry as well.
Yeah, so obviously for plant-based meats, you still need plants to make the protein. And so, a vast majority of the agriculture industry will only benefit from this transition. And there's also new opportunities for innovative farmers. So another area that's just beginning with some quite small startups is the idea of plant molecular farming. So this has only just emerged in the biopharmaceutical space, where you can create kind of compounds similar to precision fermentation, but instead of using a microbe to create proteins or other ingredients, you can just grow them in plants. And so if farmers may be disrupted in terms of their current farming opportunities, there's these new industries that are going to emerge. And for those that take those opportunities and run with it, I think there's going to be a lot of gains made in the agricultural sector, and they're going to create a lot of new jobs as well.
Amazing, thank you. There was a question on organization now, in terms of for GFI and APAC, what are your long-term aspirations? Any concrete targets you like to reach?
I don't think I can say any specific concrete targets, but I guess it goes back to on the education front. So we see that university education and building that talent pipeline to support the industry is one of our key goals. So beginning with this course in Singapore, we really would like to see uptake across the region of suitable university education to build the workforce to support this industry. Within Australia, Bianca mentioned a couple of companies like Vow and Nourish. They've just gone on hiring drives and hired a couple of dozen people, and that's just the initial startups. The big players like Impossible in December announced they wanted to hire like 100 new research staff to go on top of the researchers they already had. So there's going to be massive needs for skilled scientists, engineers, across the whole spectrum. There's going to be huge needs for a new workforce. So that's a really strong area for us to support. And I mentioned that our focus on research is something that is also up there. So even though all these companies are working on often the same problems in individual silos, we really want to create funding avenues and technical expertise where a researcher in a public institution can solve a problem that 100 companies might be trying to solve. And that's obviously going to accelerate the industry far faster than supporting those individual companies themselves. So we support that through our own research grant program, which we're just planning to grow, and really lobbying governments to unlock R&D funds towards alternative proteins is another really important area. Because the traditional agricultural industries, they get a lot of support in terms of research funding from governments. And if we can have similar opportunities for alternative proteins, it's really going to help accelerate these industries. So that's another key area for us. And outside of that, then just making sure there's enough accessible research on, downstream in terms of consumer perception, consumer priorities, where companies can access manufacturing capabilities, where they can buy their ingredients from. We look to develop those databases and just make this information as easily accessible to the whole ecosystem as possible. So that's stuff that I'm starting to develop at the moment, and we already have that for other regions around the world.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, the work that GFI is doing is just incredible, and they're truly the leaders in the global field of alternative protein. So here in Australia, the main things that we want to focus on is developing that talent pipeline. So we really just want to see more students in labs. I showed you that really sad slide where there were only 3 labs in Australia working in the space, sorry. We want more students being ambassadors of the field, because if you have one PhD student in a biomedical lab working on cell ag, they actually draw more talent into that lab and into that university, because that university is now seen as a leader in the space. So we want more ambassadors, we want more science communicators talking about this science and actually familiarizing consumers with what meat actually is and what cellular agriculture meat actually is, and the fact that they're biochemically the same, it's just the production process that's different.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, I'd like to mention, at the University of Melbourne, there's the Future Food Initiative, the Hallmark Initiative. Bianca already mentioned this before, but if you are approaching the end of your, if you are looking for like a research project, for example, that would be a great place to look into and to get more researchers on board. Okay, so I guess next point. The question is, what are the biggest technical challenges in developing alternative protein these days? This is more for the students that are interested in researching in this area and pushing the field forward.
Go on, Dean.
Sure. Well, I tried to hit on it in my presentation, but it's really across the spectrum. So I talked to our SciTech colleague in India, and so he came from a background of, he finished his master's in food science and technology kind of around, I think, 2012 or so. And at that point, the massive companies you see in the plant-based and actually cultivated sector, such as Eat Just, they were these small startups that everyone looked at kind of weirdly and thought, what are these people doing? And he jumped in at that time, whereas his safe choice would have been to go for a big multinational that's already working on this type of stuff. So the challenges they were dealing with then are the same challenges now. It's just that there's actually money and expertise targeting it. So really, if you look across the whole spectrum, there's challenges and opportunities everywhere. So I mentioned in the plant-based, that's from crop breeding all the way through to product development. So I wouldn't say that you necessarily have to, if you have an interest in one area, you're not going to have to look another way to get involved. There's opportunities abound across the spectrum. But I guess I'll let Bianca talk more in the cultivated space. But in terms of fermentation, similarly, you can go all the way from looking at machine learning or genomic typing of different species of microbes, and then the engineering challenges of, what type of reaction bioreactors do we need to put them in, and all of the optimization work that goes in there, and then scaling it up. So just the more business aspect side of things. Like really, there's opportunities everywhere you look, so it's hard to pick specific ones.
Yeah, in terms of the cell ag space, again, we've got that Pathways into Cell Ag tool, which you can use next week to figure out all the research challenges in the space and how you can get involved. But I just also want to note that a lot of the research challenges in cell ag also apply to regenerative medicine. So if you do a research project trying to figure out how to develop vascularized scaffolds, that all those skills are completely transferable into biomed. So you see a lot of people moving in between those two industries. So a lot of transferable and exchangeable skills there.
Yeah, I just did a poll at the beginning of the session, and there seems to be quite a bit of master students, and also in science. So this question that I also got from Slido probably is quite relevant. And you've already given a lot of information and a lot of tips. But there was a question: how can I get involved in alternative protein if I'm ending my master's degree this year, but have minimal experience? But they took a few subjects related to alternative protein.
Yeah, well, I guess the first point would be just similar to my last answer is I think it would be surprising to see that a lot of experience will be applicable to alternative proteins. So I think if you look at GFI's resources, so I put up a link to our student guide, resources that Bianca is releasing. There's a lot of information there that is freely available, so you don't need to buy textbooks or anything. You can really do a lot of self-education. So if this is something you're committed to, there are the resources out there for you to develop that baseline understanding, and then you can reach out to us or Bianca, and we will know the researchers that might be involved in areas if you're looking to do a PhD. So I think it's going to be, if you're committed, you can learn some of the basic skills you need yourself, and then organizations such as ours exist to help link you to researchers that might be looking for students. So I think it's, even if it might be a bit of a challenge, depending on, it's hard to know without knowing what their background is, but I think anyone that really wants to be involved can be involved because it's such an exploding industry that there's a lot of opportunities, and you don't have to have 10 years of experience in the exact area to get involved. If you're passionate, you can get involved.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I will say that in addition to all the resources out there, I highly encourage you all to network and actually meet some of the people currently working in the field to gauge what kind of skills certain companies are looking for, but also what fits for you. What are you interested in doing? What kind of skills do you want to learn? What kind of culture and environment do you want to be working in? Is it academia? Is it industry? Yeah. I highly encourage just stalking people on LinkedIn or on Twitter, sending people DMs. I'm a huge fan. This saying doesn't really apply for COVID, but I was a huge fan of a cold email and a hot coffee. So just sending people cold DMs and saying, hey, can I take you out for a 30-minute coffee or a 30-minute Zoom sesh and pick your brain and, kind of understand what you did to get to where you are today. I've used that a lot in my career to figure out what I want in career.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so we got a question from Lackvin. So he asks, a lot of resources are being used to develop alternative proteins. Are there any projections for when this industry will become energy neutral?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of hinted at that in the presentation with our recent life cycle and techno-economic analysis. But really, so we set a time frame of 2030 for that. And if you dive into the study, we have a couple of different models of where things could go and where we think they will go. So in terms of, I think it was that energy neutral. So this is an interesting one in that it crosses over into other areas of sustainability. So from our analysis, if cultivated meat production uses renewable energy, it will actually be more efficient than current animal industries are today. But if it uses sustainable energy, some of those benefits related to poultry production might be marginal. So this is, it goes wider than cell ag, where this relates to, increasing the use of sustainable energy in our national power grid. And if we can get that, then this is going to make this industry very efficient. And I guess I'll say on top of that is that we also then included tofu and plant-based diets as other options. And when it comes down to it, those are just the most efficient way to produce food and feed a population. But pragmatically, people want to eat meat. So even though those are the most efficient, we need these alternatives, and we need to make them as efficient as possible to bring down kind of the cost overall for humanity.
Bianca, do you have anything to add as well for Salad?
Yeah, I think Dean covered that really well. I would just say that there's still a lot of research that needs to be done in the field. So if that's an area that you're interested in, find a supervisor and start researching.
Wonderful. Okay, so this one is to Bianca. This is from Sue. Thank you, Sue, for your question. As the government will be a major player to drive clean meat production, what is the current stance of the government and agri-sector towards this industry in Australia?
Yeah, so the government is definitely keen on any opportunity that will boost our economy, right? And this is definitely an industry that will do that. In terms of how our government is quite risk averse. You know, in general, they're quite conservative with new technologies. So it will be quite slow until we get government funding into the field. But again, the nonprofits in the space, like Food Frontier, are really working closely with policymakers to ensure that that is being accelerated.
Is there a stance by the government for the plant-based industry or other products in alternative protein as well, Dean? What's the stance?
Well, I think as I mentioned before, you know, a large segment of our current agriculture system will benefit from plant-based and cell ag proteins because, you know, you need to get the cell media like glucose supply and others from traditional crops. So it's in a lot of the current industry's interest to support this. And yeah, I would just say Food Frontier is totally owning it in this sector, and they're really helping to create a positive narrative for why this should be supported. And a lot of players in the industry recognize this opportunity and are seeking to take it. So things are moving in the right direction. But you know, if you look overseas, Singapore is a real focus for us because they don't have kind of a traditional animal industry to speak of that needs to be they need to be careful about. So for some governments, they can really go 100% at this. Singapore and Israel are the big examples because they don't have a large animal agriculture industry. But that doesn't mean other countries won't also benefit majorly from this as well.
Awesome. Okay, so this seems to be, okay, more like innovation side, other kinds of future foods. So someone asks, are there any developments in production of vegan long-chain omega-3, vitamin B12, or heme iron sources using these processes?
Yeah, definitely. So I had a picture of Triton Algae's heme product, which they use, they use precision fermentation of microalgae to produce that. And one of the really cool developments, or one of the cool elements of that development and why I like to show that example is it's not genetically modified. So they just found a microalgae that already produced heme in small amounts and then used high throughput screening and breeding to just ramp up its production of that. And so one of the reasons Impossible isn't in Australia yet, although it's just been approved, is that the heme they've developed for precision fermentation purposes is from a genetically modified yeast. So companies like Triton, where they've avoided the conversation around genetic modification, means that these products can rapidly come to market. And there's a couple of companies that are looking at heme specifically just because it's been identified as such a kind of X factor in making plant-based meat taste exactly like real meat. I haven't had it yet because I'm in Australia like everyone here, but from the people I've talked to that have had it, they say they literally can't tell the difference between conventional meat and Impossible. I can't remember what the other compounds were they said, sorry, but I know there's a lot of companies looking at a variety of different compounds for precision fermentation to see what could be the next heme. Like heme was just the first. Impossible got there first, and look where they are now. And a lot of companies have taken notice and are developing different molecules to follow suit.
Yeah, I heard omega fatty acids, I think. So Nourish Ingredients up in Canberra, I keep forgetting, they're developing all sorts of fats for not just consumers to use for cooking. So using, for example, duck fat to roast your potatoes. They're also selling these fats for companies to put in their plant-based meats or in their cultivated meats or in their milks. So they're definitely leaders in this field.
Yep, I also think there's a lot of intersection between those different aspects of alternative proteins. I was talking to Ira. She's one of the, she's related to Just Eat Just, and she's telling me that the future would be like having plant-based meat, but then with, you know, cultured fat in it as well, is a way to reduce the cost of, you know, plant-based meat, but improving the taste and the appeal to customers. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so there was another question. Why spend so much time and money to make it look like meat as opposed to creating a new look for food, since this is a new food?
Well, consumers don't like unfamiliar things. So there's a famous saying in marketing: if you want to sell something surprising, make it familiar. If you want to sell something familiar, make it surprising. So, you know, already the production process seems a bit alienating for consumers. So a lot of companies are just trying to develop the same foods that we eat today. Having said that, Val is definitely one of the leaders in trying to produce novel sensory experiences. So they're not looking at just developing meats from the main animals that we eat today, like cow, fish, chicken. They're doing all sorts of species that you can look at on their website, but they're really trying to push the culinary barriers there.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have much to add there, but as well as consumers, investors want more surety in what they're investing in. And when this whole technology is already still so speculative, to then say, oh yeah, and we want to make it like tortoise meat as our product, you're just not going to find the investors at this stage for that. So I think once we've established that cultivated meat is in the market and people are buying it, I think we'll start to see more experimentation at that point. And that'll also be, I think as Bianca mentioned, for nutritional reasons, as well as maybe more unique kind of animal meat experiences.
Yeah, that's true. I think Val has been looking at doing zebra meat. Yeah.
Yeah, I think among other things, yeah.
Among other things. Very interesting. All right, I think it's coming quite close to the end of our session, and there doesn't seem to be more questions. So I think we'll start wrapping it up here. Yeah, but before we close, Bianca and Dean, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just honestly get in touch and start chatting to one of us. Everyone in the space is so kind and willing to collaborate and chat to you all. So just send us a message, follow our different newsletters. They're all quite different. So yeah, I highly recommend doing your research and start meeting people.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to highlight that this whole industry is quite young, so the power of individuals is very strong. And especially for myself, I've only been at GFI for about 6 months. And so I'm still meeting all the key players and individuals that could get into this space. So you as students with, you know, much better knowledge locally of, you know, who your lecturers and professors are, what kind of research groups exist. If you think they could be interested, you can reach out to me and say, X or Y professor does this type of work. I think it could be good for alternative proteins and they sound interested. Would you talk to them? If you tell me that, I'll talk to them and give them a presentation and say, look, we have these funding opportunities. We have these resources. You know, if this student that's come to you wants to do a master's in that, there's opportunities. So if you have drive, I think you can make a lot happen.
Fantastic. Yeah, and also for the Alternative Protein Initiative, we'd like to start getting more students involved and generate excitement on campus around alternative proteins, including cellular agriculture. So if people are interested, we can like band together and organize really cool events and start talking to, you know, professors, and we'll try to push this movement on campus as well. So definitely message us and keep in communication with us. But okay, for now, this has been a wonderful time and an awesome launch event for the Alternative Protein Initiative. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Bianca and Dean for coming today and talking to us and imparting, giving us your knowledge about and your expertise, sharing your expertise with us today. And I just hope it was a wonderful and interesting time for everyone and that you're excited about the developments in this sector. More events will be posted on the Facebook page if you're keen to attend more events like this. I think this was more of like a research, there was a lot of research-based topics. I think we'd like to try to diversify into different aspects to involve more people who are interested in alternative protein but are from different backgrounds. So this was a great introductory session, more research based. But yeah, we'd like to have a lot more events like this as well. So yeah, we'll be hosting these kind of educational events, but also social events and workshops. So just make sure you follow the Alternative Protein Initiative on Facebook and keep up to date with us. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now. And once the recording is over, I'd like to take a screenshot if that's okay. If people are comfortable with putting their videos on, that would be fantastic.